Okay. Our presentation today is about the Jacobite Rebellion. The reason why you only see Erhad and Mikail is because Soumaya got added a little bit later to our group, like 2 weeks ago. So don't look at that, just ignore that. For the rest, table of contents. We have taken certain aspects of the rebellion and we're going to criticize those aspects. The main theme of this criticism is religion, but we couldn't talk 10 minutes about it, so we have taken multiple stands on this. So the first part is Prince Bonnie Charles. After that, the Battle of Culloden. Then the legacy of the Scots. Then Not Your War. Then nostalgia and pride, and at the end, resolution, and of course, a conclusion. Prince Bonnie Charles. Charles was the son of James Francis Edward Stuart, the exiled king of Scotland, Ireland, and England. His grandfather was overthrown by the Hanover dynasty, so he was a Catholic king, and the Hanover dynasty were the Protestants. While the Jacobite cause was popular among some Scots, mostly the Highlanders and who were Catholics, not so much in the urbanized area who were more Protestants. Other side is a foreign invasion by the Stuarts and the French allies, because the French sided with the Stuarts in this case. The reason for this is that his grandfather has been overthrown by the Hanover dynasty in favor of the Protestant branch of the Stuarts and William III of the Netherlands. This is controversial because urban areas were Protestant in Scotland and the Highlanders were Catholics, so it was a mix, a pretty even mix, around 50%, and his grandfather had a pro-French view. And of course, as we all know, England had a long history with French when it comes to wars, battles, land dispute, and everything else when it comes. So the French in this side were the Stuarts instead of the British, who were Protestants. Also had to do with religion a little bit, because the Stuarts were Catholic, and the French were also Catholic people. It was controversial from that reason.
Okay, so the rebellion itself, the rebellion took place in 1746, and it is largely considered to be a one-sided massacre, as many battles go. The reason for the one-sided massacre can be due to two reasons. One is that the Highlanders were very poorly equipped with weapons. They had, let me just have a, I had it noted here, one moment. Oh yeah, so the Brits actually had superior weapons and they had superior tactics because they actually had a paid army which is trained and has access to actual muskets and other weapons. So the Brits had an army focused on ranged combat. So besides the ranged combat, the other army, the Protestants, actually I'm just going to stick to my script a bit more. I want the free-handed. Okay, so the rebellion was largely defeated at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. It was mostly a one-sided massacre, and it is said that the resolution could be much different, but it is much more complex than that. What happened is that the military advisor had given advice that they should not fight on the flat battlefield. However, this advice was ignored, which led to well, disadvantageous position of the rebels. So what happened is that besides that the military advisor's advice was not followed, the actual orders given by the advisor and the leaders were not received at the battlefield. The reason for this is that the battlefield was not easily overseen by from the position where the military advisor and the other leaders were, and the messengers could not deliver the messages to the people on the battlefield, which led to bad decisions being made. Okay, some historians argue that the battle was much more complex and nuanced than this, and the Jacobites could have had a chance at victory if they had chosen a different strategy. This is controversial because Bonnie Prince Charles had ignored his military advisor's advice. Okay, and this led to a mostly one-sided massacre as the Brits had more superior army. Yeah, that's just about my part.
Yeah, okay, so What was the aftermath of the Jacobite rebellion? So first of all, it was a brutal crackdown by the British government on the Scottish Highlanders. So what was it? So the clan chiefs and other leaders were executed. So the traditional way of the Highlanders was destroyed. Why, you may ask? The Jacobite rebellion was seen as a direct threat to the Scottish government. The government responded by force, which led to the clan chiefs and other leaders being executed. The controversy and also the criticism on this would be that the Scottish people, not so much all the people, but just the Highlanders, were not oppressed until this point. There was never even a harshly oppressed event going on. The Highlanders could just live their lives amongst the Scots and it would be fine. Because the government actually changed its laws, which the government tried to disarm the Highlanders with. By not letting them live their lives again with their traditional way and their traditional culture. So that was all off the table. They just had to be Scottish in that sense. This was very oppressing their culture and again their traditional ways. It had a huge impact on the Scottish culture and on the Highlanders' identity. Because again, if you have to lose your culture and your identity and you have to be more Scottish, then that would be an oppression. Until this point, this was a unique case.
Okay,
Yeah.
not your war. The rebellion was not just a Scottish affair like I pointed out before. The rebels received a huge assistance from French in resources and support, while the British received from the Netherlands and our other allies who they had in the time from the received support. You wonder why French sided with Scottish. Well, Scottish were of course in this case Catholic, so there was one religion, and also because the new dynasty in the British throne didn't have a pro-French view like the Stuart's grandfather had. So, what business did the French have in Scotland? They were merely the allies to it, yet they played a big role in the oppression, right? Well, the oppression didn't happen till at that point, till they decided to rebel. Jacobites were, like Soumaya pointed out, were highly oppressed after the battle. If they never fight against the current throne, the Hanover dynasty, they may not be able to press. They might just live the way they lived till that point, so with clan chiefs and in their traditional way.
It's my piece, okay. The Jacobite rebellion has continued to be a source of inspiration and nostalgia for some Scots, particularly the Highlanders. However, it had quite the opposite effect for the rebels, for the Protestants. That is, this might be obvious to many of you because obviously the Highlanders have won the war because of their the Highlanders have won the war, and therefore their ideals have been used. They have gone forward, and they have won. And this is obviously this gives them a sense of pride. But this has led to ongoing debates about the role of history, memory, and identity in Scottish society, and potential for historical events and shape contemporary politics and culture. This is controversial because the Highlands feel a sense of pride due to their heritage and due to their religious standpoints. And the Protestants have actually got quite the opposite due to their losses in the battle and due to their otherwise, oppression, due to the oppression that followed the loss of this rebellion. And actually the oppression that followed has not just ended after a while, it's still ongoing. This has resulted in the destruction of the Scottish culture and the things that they had known as their heritage, such as the clans and the gangs and their leaders and all that kind of stuff. And well, those were all shut down by the government after this war.
Yeah.
Quite literally.
As I said, the Jacobite rebellion wasn't entirely fair just between French, Catholics and Stuarts, Catholics and British. A lot of Protestant Scots sided with the British in this case as well, to fight against their own people. basically, even though they were Protestant and the other side was Catholic. This could have been resolved in more diplomatic status, keeping the best in terms for country and for both sides as well. Like, why would you fight against somebody you want to be for somebody who you want to be free of? Doesn't make sense, right? But I think they felt more because of the religion reason to side with the British instead of with the Highlanders, who were Catholics. Johnson's famous criticism of the Jacobite rebellion reflects a broader Protestant viewpoint that saw Catholics as a threat to the political and religious order of Britain. While this view has been challenged and critiqued by many scholars and historians, it remains an important part of the religious and political debate surrounding the Jacobite rebellion and its legacy after the rebellion.
Okay. So, what was the legacy of the Jacobite Rising? So, up until this point, we talked about the battlefield. Well, the battlefield was over, and then the laws were enforced. Well, after that, what happened? So, the laws were enforced, aiming this at the Highlanders. But why, you may ask again? Okay, so that the government would be in control. Yeah, changing the laws had a huge impact on the Scottish culture and their identity. They couldn't really be Highlanders anymore. They had to be more Scottish, and yeah, the laws were enforced. What else? There were actually more consequences than only this. Their identity, their culture were actually disarmed. The ties between Scotland and England were broken. Before that, they had like small arguments between those two, but up until that point, it was just completely broken. I already said that. They lost the support of the Stuart cause in Europe, which hasn't been here said on the slide. This left a huge legacy in today's Scotland. There's actually an ongoing debate up until this point. And there were a lot of conspiracy theories because why did the Scottish people enforce all of these laws on the Highlanders? Was it because Britain wanted to be in control over Scotland, or maybe because they wanted allies in Europe? This is also a point of criticism because they didn't really let the Highlanders be who they wanted to be, and they gained a lot of it. The British, but the Scottish people actually didn't gain anything. They were disarmed, and they actually had a poor existing after that. Oh, still my part. Conclusion. In conclusion, the Jacobite Rising was a one-sided massacre. There was a lack of military advice. The military advisor actually did give some advice, but before this message even reached the battlefield, the messenger died on the way, which was the main reason the Jacobite forces didn't win. Who won, you may ask? Well, the Hanoverian won. That was the opposing party. Due to a disadvantage, so the British army, they had a lot of weaponry, and the Jacobite forces, they didn't have a lot of weaponry and British tactics, so it was a disadvantage situation. They got support and support from Europe. They got support from the French government, but at the same time, there was like an opposition from the British side because the British had a lot of weaponry again and a lot of tactics. What was the aftermath? The aftermath was that the Highlanders' life was completely destroyed. The legacy of the Jacobite rebellion still remains till this day. It is an ongoing debate, and at the end, it was a lack of communication, a lack of military advisement, and it actually highlights the importance of diplomacy in a unified and free country. Then we have a reference list at the end.
Before we go to the reference list, I'd like to add one thing which I have not mentioned in my part. I talked about the weapons of the Scots. Which was they had muskets and they actually had proper weaponry and tactics and training. The rebels did not. The rebels were, you can think of how farmers fight with pitchforks, essentially. They just made do with what they had. They had, some had muskets, but not really at a proper, their weaponry was just not up to par with the Scots, and therefore that battle was definitely one-sided regarding the tactics as well as the weaponry. So, in a way, I just figured I'd mention that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lastly, we have a reference list. So we got all of these references from the APA references. So for instance, the Bonnie Prince Charlie, a biography, which we got a lot of information from. Then we have Prince Charlie and the Untold Story of the Jacobite Rising, the Scottish clearances, so also the opposing part, of course, Scotland's last battle and the forging of the British Empire, and lastly, clanship, commerce, and the House of Stuart. This was the Stuart case in Europe. This is where we got the information from. And this was the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening.